Evening, folks. Welcome back. It's John Pettipas. Right now, it's 2 minutes before 9 o'clock in the evening on Sunday night, which is the 9th day of January 2021. And the title of tonight's video is simply The FOUGERES of FRANKVILLE. Frankville is a beautiful community in East Atlantic County, just above Harvard-Bushy. It's a lovely former railroad community. The railroad built this country. Well, Frankville, the railroad went right through Frankville, and it had a great impact on the community. There's a store, it was a Levangie store. It was there for over 100 years. They had a post office, I think, for 105 years. They had a post office, and then they got the store business, and they were wonderful people, and it served the people well, and the community appreciate them well too. Anyway, it's the FOUGERES of Frankville. I had a conversation this evening with a fine young fella by the name of Fougere, whose great-grandparents were Russell and Laura Fougere. And I remember Laura and Russell. He was a very hard-working railroad man, late Russell Fougere, and his wonderful wife, Laura, was a remarkable lady in her own right, and she was a Wood from Auld, Cove. So Woods are good. They're very good, actually. And FOUGERES are wonderful as well. So now, there's an expression that the railroad built this country. So Russell was a railroad man, and he worked, my knowledge, pretty well all his working life on the railroad. In the later years, he worked on what was known as the rail liner. That was your passenger service. I'd be going to Anakin Chamber of Commerce meeting, or down to Sydney or something in business, and you go in the rail liner. That was there's no more passenger train here. The passenger train stopped, I think, in 1991 or 92. So it's, 31 or 32 years ago this year since we've had passenger trains here. Anyway, Russell and Laura were wonderful people. And they take, and I'm going to mention this here. I'm smiling this. They take the electricity. There was no electricity in Port Hood the other day, and there's no electricity in West Bay Road this evening, in Princeville and so on, and a lot of power outages because of the branches breaking, heavy wet snow yesterday morning. The crews out dedicatedly doing repairs. Anyway, this expression, you never miss the water till the well runs dry. You never miss the water till the well runs dry. Well, there was a guy in Frankville just alongside the, I should explain that the great-great-grandfather of young Russell, his great-grandfather Russell's father was Simon. And Simon was a gentleman that was an engineer on the Scotia ferry that plied the Strait of Cancer waters from Port Mulgrave up and over to Point Tupper, brought the train ferry, hawking the train. So the father they didn't take the locomotives across because they're heavy, but the box cars and coal cars and flat cars hauling steel and so on. So, and I'm told he was a big guy, not morbidly, he was just a good-sized, rugged chunk of a boy. He's a capable, good-sized chunk of a man. It wasn't a boy, he was a man. And I'm told, I knew one of his sons, Vince, and he said, Dad could step dance light as a feather. He was a remarkable step dancer, and he's since deceased. And actually, I think he died of a heart attack right on the Scotia ferry at work one evening, sad to say. He succumbed to a heart disease. And his widow lived in the family home, and Russell got married and stayed with the mother and his wife, Laura. And Laura looked after her mother-in-law. And alongside that house was the Kings. And Robert King Sr. had worked in Braintree, Massachusetts, and learned about electricity and wiring. So they didn't have to have candles or a kerosene lamp or whatever. Go to bed like the chickens when it's dark and get up when it's light in the morning, okay? They had like the first house in Frankville, Anakin County, probably the first house in Harvard-Bushy, East Anakin County, have electricity, was Robert King Sr. So now, next door lived the FOUGERE family, and he had income from working as an engineer on the Scotia ferry, and he decided, because his elderly mother was his big family was there to get indoor plumbing. And it's the first place that had the indoor toilet, the flush toilet. And there was somebody else not too far away from them that got a little bit envious. A small area that happened sometime. So the Kings had the first house that had electricity. It would be like the screw light bulbs, and it wasn't incandescent then. And that other one, fluorescent, excuse me, and the Fougères had the flush toilet. So the third house, or whatever, the few houses up the road there, got a little bit envious, and they said, next thing, go over to Simon Fougere. You don't have to wipe your ass. The machine will do it for you. That's a true story. Vince told me that story years ago. He was a remarkable man. Two Fougere boys. Vince married Mary Wood, and Russell married Laura Wood. And Laura Wood, interestingly, after she became a widow, she outlived her husband, and she moved to Auld's Cove to help look after her mother. And she was a remarkable lady. I remember being at a funeral because Father Bernard McAdam did the Mass at St. Paul's Church in Harbushy. And Mrs. Wood, when it was time for communion, she stood up in communion prayer. And I remember in his homily, Father Bernard McAdam said, Mrs. Wood, Johnny's widow by the time, Mrs. Johnny Wood, Jessie, was gracing us with her presence. And that there was truer words never spoke. Mrs. Wood was gracing us with her presence. And so Laura, I believe, was the third oldest in the family. There was Jackie, oldest son, oldest period. Next oldest daughter was Mary, followed by Laura. I'm pretty certain that Laura was the third oldest of those 14 Wood kids. So the Fougères of Frankville. There's a Fougères down the road is Frank Ben. He was Ben Fougere's son. And he worked in the railroad. And when I say the railroad built this country, they're not kidding. And men like that, those railroad workers, they really built it. There was a train station in Frankville years ago. In fact, Tanya Kennedy, whose maiden name was Fougere, and she be related cousins in there somehow. Tanya has a lovely horse riding stable, and she stores horses, and you can have a birthday party to rent the place and look down in the auditorium and see the horses and so on. And she'll take the kids out for rides on the horses after, if they're big enough to sit in the saddle and so on, and assist them. And her stable is called Station Stables. Station Stables in Frankville. It's a wonderful operation. So lots of Fougères in Frankville, and that's why I call it the Fougères of Frankville. And they're all wonderful people. There's Master Rocky the Coast.